She's not one of us. Put her with the staff." The words dripped like venom from my brother's new wife. My parents just stared straight ahead, their faces blank. A small smile played on my lips as I pulled out my phone. Terminate the agreement. A single text, just like that, $28 million disappeared. My brother swayed on his feet. My mother's face turned a ghostly white. The bride could only stare, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. I turned and walked away, and in that moment, they lost absolutely everything. The event manager looked mortified as she pointed toward a small, wobbly table, tucked away in a corner, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. "Miss Vance, your seat is over there," with our staff during their break. A hush descended over the entire wedding reception. It felt like 200 pairs of eyes swiveled to watch me, standing there in my custom-tailored dress and clutching my small clutch, as I was directed to the table where the hired help ate their meals. Sophia's voice, intentionally loud and sharp, sliced through the opulent ballroom. "She doesn't deserve anything. Let her eat with the servants." My brother, Ethan, actually let out a short, harsh laugh. My mother, Catherine, suddenly became intensely interested in the bubbles in her champagne. My father, Robert, simply pulled out his phone and started scrolling. Not a single member of my family said a word as I made the long walk of shame to that rickety table. The only sound was the click of my heels on the marble floor, followed by a ripple of whispers. What none of them knew was that I held the keys to the $28 million investment that was their company's last hope, and my phone held the 3 simple words that would detonate their entire world. The catering staff at table 14 shifted uncomfortably as I approached, clearly having no idea what the protocol was for a guest being exiled to their break area. One young waitress in a starched uniform even started to stand, likely thinking I was lost, before the manager hissed something in her ear that made her sink back into her chair, her face flushed with secondhand embarrassment. I sat down on the cold, hard metal chair, a stark contrast to the plush, upholstered seats at the lavishly decorated guest tables. I placed my clutch on the table next to a half-eaten sandwich in a Tupperware container. The entire spectacle was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to remind me of my place in their rigid family hierarchy. Just 3 hours earlier, I was in Ethan's office reviewing the final paperwork for the merger intended to save Vance Industries from its latest self-inflicted crisis. Without the Davenport investment, the financial projections were bleak. We had, at best, 6 weeks of operating capital left. Maybe 8, if I could somehow pull off yet another financial miracle with our creditors. Ethan had burned through $2 million on a disastrous expansion into overseas markets he hadn't bothered to research, going directly against my explicit advice. The new technology infrastructure he'd insisted on implementing was a complete disaster, riddled with compatibility issues that I would have identified immediately if anyone had bothered to include me in a single planning meeting. "Just sign here, Ellie," Ethan had said, sliding the papers across his enormous mahogany desk without looking up from his phone. "It's just the standard minority shareholder approval. Sophia's father needs it by the end of the day." He conveniently forgot to mention the clause that would dissolve my position the second the merger was finalized. He must have assumed I wouldn't take the time to read the fine print, buried deep on page 47, but I had read every single word. I had also read the email Sophia had carelessly left open on his laptop the week before when she'd borrowed his office. The one that detailed their entire plan to restructure Vance Industries into a subsidiary of Davenport Global, with every member of the Vance family, except for Ethan, being removed from all operations within 6 months. That morning had started just like every other morning for the past 15 years. My alarm screamed at 5:30 a.m., but I was already awake, my mind churning through spreadsheets and financial models, trying to figure out how to keep Vance Industries solvent for another day. The coffee machine in the kitchen sputtered to life as I scanned the overnight emails from our suppliers in Asia, handling issues Ethan wouldn't even recognize as problems. There was a tense dispute over payment terms that was threatening to cost us a critical manufacturing contract. I quickly composed a detailed response, proposing a creative solution involving partial advance payments tied to performance benchmarks, then sent it from Ethan's email account. He would never even be aware a crisis had been averted. By 6 a.m., I was deep into the quarterly reports due for next week's board meeting. These were the same reports Ethan would later read from cue cards I had prepared for him, presenting insights I had developed and taking full credit for strategies I had hammered out while he was sleeping off another late night with his friends. The irony was suffocating. I had graduated at the top of my class from Wharton Business School. Ethan had barely passed at a state college, thanks to a substantial legacy donation. Yet here I was, his ghostwriter, his strategist, his corporate lifeline. Catherine, my mother, floated downstairs at 7 a.m., wrapped in a flawless silk robe, her face already perfectly made up for whatever charity luncheon was on her schedule that day. She glanced at me, hunched over my laptop at the kitchen island, surrounded by stacks of financial documents and merger contracts. "Don't make a mess, Eleanor." The cleaning service doesn't come until tomorrow. She poured herself a cup of green tea, a new affectation she'd adopted after reading an article claiming coffee caused wrinkles. "And please remember to pick up Ethan's dry cleaning. He needs his blue suit for the rehearsal dinner tonight." I wanted to tell her that I had just spent half the night on the phone with our bank's president, successfully negotiating an extension on a $3 million loan we were about to default on. I wanted to tell her that the mess on the table was the only thing standing between the Vance family name and the public humiliation of bankruptcy court, but I just nodded and mentally added dry cleaning to my list of errands to run between my crisis management calls. The humiliation I felt at this wedding was not a new feeling. It was simply the most public performance of a drama that had been playing out behind closed doors for my entire life. When I was 16, I won a national mathematics competition. The trophy was quietly put in a box in the basement storage room. When Ethan placed third in a regional golf tournament, my father commissioned a custom-built display case for it in his study. When I earned a full scholarship to Wharton, my mother told her friends I was going away for school, to study something with numbers. When Ethan got a job at Vance Industries straight out of college, they threw a party for 200 people. Now, sitting at the staff table while Sophia preened in her $40,000 gown, loudly telling her bridesmaids how she and Ethan were going to modernize Vance Industries by cutting all the dead weight, I felt the crushing weight of every single dismissed achievement, every stolen idea, every moment I was made to feel invisible, pressing down on me. The young waitress beside me timidly slid her half-eaten sandwich further away, as if my very presence had somehow contaminated her break time. Across the ballroom, I could see my father, Robert, delivering a toast about legacy and family values, his voice booming over the clinking of crystal glasses. Glasses I was apparently not worthy enough to drink from. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my lawyer, confirming that everything was in place. The network of shell companies I had painstakingly constructed over 5 years of secret late-night work. The controlling interests I had discreetly acquired in every single vendor Vance Industries depended on for its survival. The private equity firm I owned through a Delaware LLC, which now held their restructured debt. One text message from me would trigger a domino effect, transferring everything to Apex Strategies, my company, built with my own savings, my own connections, and the intelligence they had used but never once acknowledged. I looked over at Ethan, laughing with his groomsmen. I saw my mother adjusting her pearls as she gossiped with her high society friends. I saw my father checking his phone for market updates on a company he didn't realize was already a ghost. They thought they had finally put me in my place. They thought this corner table was the pinnacle of my humiliation. They had no idea it was the launch pad for their complete and utter destruction. The stark contrast between that staff table and the quarterly family meeting just 2 weeks earlier should have been a clear sign of what was to come. I had arrived at the Vance family home at 3 p.m. sharp, my arms loaded with the financial reports that would determine whether we would survive another quarter. The house had that familiar smell of my mother's expensive potpourri clashing with my father's cigars, a scent that always made my throat feel tight. Ethan's new Porsche was, as usual, parked at a careless angle in the driveway, blocking half the street. I heard her voice before I saw her. It was high and crystalline, the kind of voice that had never been told to be quiet. "This place has such character," she was saying as I entered through the kitchen. The slight pause she took before the word character told me exactly what she really thought of our family home. Sophia Davenport was standing in our living room like a piece of modern art that clashed horribly with the traditional decor. Her cream-colored designer suit probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was styled in seemingly effortless waves that I knew, from glancing at Ethan's credit card statements, required weekly visits to a very expensive salon. She was studying the family photos on the mantelpiece with the kind of detached curiosity one might give to artifacts in a museum you had no intention of ever visiting again. Ethan was hovering beside her, his chest puffed out like a proud peacock. "Sophia, this is Ellie," he said, finally noticing my presence. "She helps out with some of the paperwork. I had just pulled a 48-hour marathon session to untangle a contract dispute that could have cost us our largest client." My eyes were burning with exhaustion, and my fingers still ached from typing endless revisions of the settlement agreement. But I just extended my hand and smiled politely. "I'm the Chief Operating Officer," I corrected him, my voice quiet but firm. Sophia's handshake was exactly what I'd expected. Limp, brief, her fingertips barely brushing against mine before she snatched her hand away. "Oh, Ethan mentioned you handle the filing. How lovely that family businesses can find a role for everyone." Ethan laughed. He actually laughed Ellie's being a little generous with her title. "She's more of an internal consultant." He then added, "Sophia's father is Richard Davenport of Davenport Global." Of course, I knew who Richard Davenport was. I had been tracking his corporate acquisitions for the last 3 years, watching as he swallowed one company after another, stripped them of their assets, and left empty husks in his wake. Vance Industries was exactly the kind of vulnerable, family-run business he loved to target. My father, Robert, emerged from his study, his face lighting up at the sight of Sophia, as if she were a walking blank check, Miss Davenport. "Ethan didn't tell us you'd be joining us for the family meeting. I hope it's not an intrusion," Sophia said, with a well-practiced charm. "Ethan thought it would be a good idea for me to understand the family dynamics before we make things official. Make things official." The words hung in the air, a threat disguised as a promise. We all moved into the dining room, which also served as our makeshift conference room. I had already set up my papers at my usual spot, the chair closest to the door, where I could quickly access files from my father's study. But Robert simply swept my documents aside, gathering them into a messy pile and moving them to the side counter. "Sophia, please, take this seat. The lighting is much better for you here. Ellie, you don't mind just taking notes today, do you? Your handwriting is so much neater than Ethan's." I stood there for a moment, holding my laptop and the reports I'd spent a week preparing as I watched Sophia settle into my chair. She elegantly crossed her legs and placed her phone on the table, right where my quarterly analysis should have been. Ethan pulled out the chair next to her, the one where I usually sat to present financial projections. Robert took his place at the head of the table. My mother emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray with her finest china, the set she only brought out for the most important guests. I set up my laptop on the side counter, my back to them, and began typing as they started discussing the future of Vance Industries, as if I wasn't even in the room. "Revenue is up 12% this quarter," Ethan announced proudly, reading directly from the executive summary I had written for him that very morning. He stumbled over the word amortization and mispronounced liquidity twice, but Sophia gazed at him as if he were a financial genius. "That's incredible growth," Sophia murmured. "Daddy will be very impressed." I wanted to scream that the revenue growth was a direct result of 3 new contracts I had personally negotiated while Ethan was on a golf trip in Scottsdale. I wanted to explain that the improved cash flow was due to payment terms I had painstakingly restructured during late-night calls with our vendors. Instead, I just kept typing up meeting notes that I knew no one would ever read. After dinner, my mother's overcooked roast beef, which Sophia barely touched, Ethan stood up with a theatrical flair he must have practiced in the mirror. He tapped his champagne glass with a knife, the crystal sound ringing through the dining room. "I have an announcement to make." 2 announcements, actually. He reached for Sophia's hand. "First, Sophia and I are engaged." My mother gasped with a delight that sounded almost genuine. My father nodded his approval, his mind already calculating the social and financial capital this union would bring. I simply typed, "Ethan announced engagement to S. Davenport," and tried to ignore the cold, sinking feeling in my gut. "And second," Ethan continued, his voice adopting what he clearly thought was a commanding, businesslike tone, "the Davenport family has agreed to a revolutionary partnership with Vance Industries. We're talking about a $28 million investment that will transform us from a regional player into a national force." As Ethan spoke, Sophia's fingers were flying across her phone screen. She wasn't even trying to be discreet. When she put her phone down to take a sip of water, I could see part of her screen from where I was standing. The message was to someone named James, probably her assistant. It read, "The sister situation will be handled after signatures. Dad wants her neutralized before Q3 neutralized?" Like I was some kind of chemical spill that needed to be contained. The meeting continued for another hour. They discussed wedding venues and merger strategies, honeymoon destinations and hostile takeovers, as if they were all just items on the same transactional checklist. And I realized they were. This wasn't a marriage, it was an acquisition, and Vance Industries was the company being acquired. Later, after everyone had moved to the living room for coffee and the dry store-bought cookies my mother was trying to pass off as homemade, I stayed behind to clean up the dining room. That's when I found it, left carelessly on the table like one of Ethan's forgotten responsibilities. A draft of the Davenport investment contract, 47 pages of dense legalese that would decide the future of our family. I closed the contract draft and slipped it carefully into my bag. The house was quiet now, except for the distant sound of my mother's forced laughter from the other room. Through the leather of my bag, my fingers traced the edge of the pages, feeling the weight of the evidence that would either be my undoing or my liberation. That night, I didn't drive back to my apartment. I drove to a nondescript office park on the edge of town, where I rented a small, windowless unit under a name that wasn't exactly mine. The fluorescent lights flickered on, illuminating what 5 years of controlled fury had built. 3 large monitors sat on a cheap desk I'd bought at a liquidation sale. Filing cabinets lined one entire wall, each drawer meticulously organized with the documents of companies that existed only on paper in Delaware's corporate registry. This was the nerve center of Apex Strategies. This was where it lived, breathed, and grew, while my family slept soundly. The logistics company was my first acquisition, a move born from a mix of desperation and insomnia. Vance Industries relied on Summit Freight for everything: shipping, warehousing, last-mile delivery. But they treated Summit like an afterthought, consistently paying their invoices 60 or even 90 days late. Old Mr. Henderson, the owner, was dying of cancer, and his son had no interest in taking over the business. They needed a buyer who understood their true value. I bought the company for $80,000, every last penny I had saved from years of ghostwriting Ethan's reports, solving my father's business problems, and never drawing a salary that came close to matching my contributions. The ownership was hidden behind a shell company called Goldfish LLC. named after Mr. Bubbles, the goldfish I'd had when I was 7, back when I still believed that fair meant equal. Within 6 months, I had completely restructured Summit's operations, improved their profit margins by 30%, and quietly increased their rates for Vance Industries by 15%. Ethan signed the new contracts without even reading them. Next came Digital Weaver, the small tech startup that managed Vance Industries' entire digital infrastructure. The founder, a brilliant programmer named David Park, was a genius with code, but terrible at business. He had built the systems that kept our operations running, but Ethan treated him like an IT janitor. I approached David through a third party, offering him real equity and the respect he deserved. I absorbed his company into Marina Ventures, another shell that traced back to a P.O. box in Delaware. Each acquisition followed the same quiet pattern: identify the companies that Vance Industries couldn't survive without, but consistently mistreated, purchase them through anonymous entities that couldn't be traced back to me, improve their operations and profitability while maintaining the illusion that nothing had changed. By the end of year 3, I controlled 6 of their most critical vendors. By year 5, I held the puppet strings to everything that kept Vance Industries alive. The wall above my desk looked like something out of a conspiracy theorist's basement. Red string connected printed corporate charters, photos of shell company registrations, and complex flowcharts that showed how money moved through the intricate maze I had constructed. At the very center of it all was a diagram of Vance Industries, completely surrounded by the web I had woven. From a distance, it looked like a spider's trap, with my family's company caught helplessly in the middle. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "This is Clara Chin. We need to talk." I hadn't heard that name spoken in 15 years. My father's sister, my Aunt Clara, had been erased from our family history. Her crime? Refusing to marry the banker my father had handpicked for her. My mother had cut her out of all the family photo albums. Her name was forbidden at the dinner table, but I remembered her. Fierce, brilliant, and unwilling to make herself smaller to make others feel comfortable. We met at a truck stop diner 40 miles outside the city. She looked just as I remembered, only sharper, as if exile had chiseled away anything soft. Her suit was expensive but understated. Her handshake was firm. She ordered a black coffee and cut straight to the chase. "I've been watching you," she said. "Through corporate filings, financial reports, the invisible breadcrumb trails you think no one is following. You're building something." I want to know why I could have lied, but something in her eyes, a shared flicker of defiance, told me she already knew the answer. So I told her everything. The systematic erasure of my contributions, the stolen credit, the 5:30 a.m. mornings while Ethan slept until noon, the contracts I negotiated that bore his name, the company I had saved over and over again while being treated like a piece of office furniture. Clara listened without a single interruption, occasionally nodding as if she were checking off items on a mental list. When I finally finished, she pulled out a tablet and showed me her own web. She had built a consulting firm worth $40 million. Her client list included 3 of the firms that held Vance Industries' debt. "I know their largest creditor," she said. "Blackstone Private Equity. I helped them restructure 2 other acquisitions. They trust me. If you want real control, you need their debt. I can make that happen. But I want something in return." "What?" I want to watch Robert's face when he realizes his precious empire was dismantled by the 2 women he tried to erase. Our partnership was forged over bitter coffee and shared wounds. Clara introduced me to a man named Jonathan at Blackstone through a conference call, presenting me as a private investor interested in distressed assets. The negotiations took 3 intense weeks. I leveraged everything I had: my shadow companies, my personal savings, a loan I took out against the future earnings of the vendors I now controlled. When the dust finally settled, Apex Strategies owned 60% of Vance Industries' debt through a subsidiary called Phoenix Ventures. The next phase of the plan required patience. I spent months meticulously documenting every transaction, every late payment Vance Industries made to the vendors I controlled, every single contract Ethan had signed without reading. The paper trail was flawless, legal, and absolutely devastating. And then, Sophia made her mistake. 3 days before the wedding, she left herself logged into her email on the conference room computer. Ethan had asked me to back up the company's servers, a menial task he'd forgotten about until the IT contractor threatened to quit. I was alone in the office at 10 p.m., the entire building silent except for the hum of the servers, when I noticed her inbox still open on the screen. The subject of the top email sent to Richard Davenport that afternoon was finalizing the transition. It read, "Once she signs, we can sideline her. She doesn't deserve a seat at the table anyway. Ethan agrees the company will run much more smoothly without family complications." Attached was a detailed restructuring plan that completely eliminated my position, dissolved my shares, and installed Davenport Global Associates in every key management role. They had even allocated my office to Sophia's personal assistant. I forwarded the entire email chain to 3 separate secure locations: my personal server, Aunt Clara's encrypted email, and my lawyer's private system. Then I just sat there, in the dark conference room, staring at the screen, feeling something inside me harden from anger into absolute cold certainty. The certainty that had settled in my bones in that dark conference room stayed with me through the next 72 hours. I shut down the computer, locked up the office, and drove home through the sleeping city, knowing that the very foundations of Vance Industries had already crumbled. The wedding preparations would continue, the charade would go on, and I would play my assigned part perfectly one last time. My mother called at 7 a.m. sharp, 3 days before the wedding. The dress fitting is at 2. "Don't be late, Eleanor. We need to present an image of family unity for this." Her voice had that specific tone she used when she was giving an order but trying to disguise it as a request. I agreed, already knowing exactly what was waiting for me at Celestine's Bridal, the exclusive boutique where Sophia had been holding court for the past 6 months. The shop reeked of gardenias and some cloying synthetic perfume that made my throat tighten. Sophia was standing on a raised platform, surrounded by a fortress of mirrors that multiplied her image into infinity. The $40,000 dress cascaded around her in shimmering waves of silk and hand-sewn pearls. Her bridesmaids, 3 executives from Davenport Global and 2 of her high society friends, were arranged on plush, cream-colored chairs, sipping champagne from crystal flutes. "Finally," Sophia said as she saw me, even though I was 5 minutes early, "someone needs to deal with this hem. The seamstress has clumsy fingers." The elderly seamstress, a woman named Mrs. Park who had been altering wedding gowns for 30 years, stood quietly off to the side. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. I recognized her expression. It was the same one I wore during family dinners. "Ellie, get down here and hold the train while I walk," Sophia commanded. "Not asked, I need to see how it moves." I knelt on the boutique's plush carpet, the thick pile rough against my knees through my dress pants. The train was surprisingly heavy, weighted down with thousands of tiny seed pearls. Sophia began to walk in a slow, deliberate circle as I shuffled behind her on my knees, making sure the expensive fabric didn't touch the floor. "So," one of the bridesmaids said, her voice laced with the false casualness that always precedes an act of cruelty. "What exactly is your role in the wedding, Ellie?" Before I could even form a response, Sophia laughed. "Oh, Ellie's not in the wedding party. She'll be handling logistics. You know, making sure the vendors show up on time, dealing with any little problems that arise. She's very good at managing details." "Like a wedding planner?" another bridesmaid asked. "No, more like..." Sophia paused, pretending to search for the right word. "Support staff. Every family has someone who handles the unglamorous tasks." They all tittered with laughter. My mother, who had been sitting in the corner scrolling through her phone, glanced up for a brief moment, saw me on my knees holding Sophia's train, and then returned her attention to her screen without a word. Mrs. Park, the seamstress, made a tiny, almost inaudible sound in her throat that might have been disapproval, but no one else seemed to notice. Actually, Sophia continued, still circling as I crawled behind her, we're restructuring everything after the merger, making Vance Industries more professional, less nepotism, more merit-based positions. She glanced down at me, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. Some changes will be difficult, but they're necessary for growth. The champagne flutes clinked as her bridesmaids toasted to necessary changes. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, my hands steady on the pearl-encrusted fabric, mentally filing away every word, every laugh, every single moment of their calculated humiliation. In the mirror, my eyes met Mrs. Park's, and for a second, I saw something flicker in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or perhaps pity. I quickly looked away. 2 nights later, my apartment doorbell rang at 2 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw my brother Ethan, swaying in the hallway, his tie undone, his usually perfect hair disheveled. I opened the door and he practically fell inside, the smell of expensive bourbon preceding him like a toxic cloud. Ellie, he slurred, stumbling towards my couch. My favorite sister. Your only sister, I corrected him. Watching as he collapsed onto the cushions, he let out a sharp, hollow laugh. That's what I love about you. Always correcting, always so precise. He suddenly grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so intoxicated. You know I appreciate you, right? Everything you do for the company? For me. For a split second, I felt a tiny crack in the wall of ice around my heart. Maybe, just maybe. He finally understood. Maybe the alcohol had dissolved the barrier that prevented him from seeing me as anything more than a function. I need you to do something for me, he continued, his eyes struggling to focus on my face. The contracts, the Davenport contracts, just sign them tomorrow. Don't read them. Reading just wastes time. Sophia's father gets annoyed by delays. Ethan, you trust me, right? His grip tightened. You've always been so good at following instructions. That's what I tell Sophia. Ellie never causes problems. Ellie always does what needs to be done. The tiny crack in my chest instantly sealed itself with a fresh layer of ice. What does the contract say about my position? He waved his free hand dismissively. Details, details. Sophia and her father will handle all of that. They're very good at structuring things efficiently. He let out a massive yawn, his eyes closing. Just sign where they tell you to. For the family. Within minutes, he was snoring loudly, sprawled across my couch in his $1,000 suit. I sat in the chair across from him, watching my brother sleep off his latest indulgence, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no disappointment, just the cold, sharp clarity of final understanding. To him, I wasn't a person. I was a tool, and tools don't read contracts. Tools don't ask questions. Tools just perform their function until they're no longer needed. I draped a blanket over him, not out of any sense of love, but out of sheer habit, and went to my bedroom where my laptop was waiting. The destruct sequence was already programmed, waiting for a single command to be activated. Every document was transferred. Every contract was adjusted. Every piece of leverage was perfectly positioned. 3 words would trigger the avalanche. The morning of the wedding dawned with a cruel, bright sunshine. My phone buzzed at 6 a.m. It was a text from the wedding coordinator. Miss Vance, table 14. Please use the service entrance upon arrival Mrs. Davenport's specific request. I called the coordinator, already knowing what she would say but needing to hear the official confirmation. Hi, this is Ellie Vance. I think there might be an error with my seating assignment. The woman's nervous, telling pause said it all. No miss, no error. Mrs. Davenport was very specific. She said you'd be more comfortable there, away from the main festivities, near the The kitchen entrance with the catering staff on their break. I see. Thank you for confirming. I ended the call and opened my laptop. The phone app was ready, the 3-word message queued up. All the documentation that Aunt Clara and I had painstakingly assembled was uploaded to secure servers. The cascade would be instantaneous and irreversible. I closed the laptop and began to dress carefully for what I knew would be the last time I would ever play the role of the invisible sister. The designer dress I'd bought for the occasion cost more than I had ever spent on a piece of clothing. It was chosen specifically to blend in with the Davenport aesthetic, navy blue, understated and expensive enough that no one could accuse me of embarrassing the family, yet forgettable enough that I would fade into the background, just as they expected me to. The drive to the Davenport estate took 40 minutes through the heavy morning traffic. I passed 3 separate car accidents, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement from an earlier rain shower, and I thought about how quickly things can change direction. One moment you're moving forward, and the next, everything is sideways and broken. The metaphor felt a little on the nose, but undeniably appropriate. The massive iron gates of the estate stood open, lavishly decorated with white roses and baby's breath that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. A valet in a crisp uniform approached my car, then hesitated when he saw me behind the wheel. "Are you with the catering company?" he asked, his eyes scanning my dress with open confusion. "I'm Ellie Vance, the groom's sister." His face instantly flushed a deep red. "My apologies, Miss Vance. Please proceed straight ahead to the main entrance." But when I reached the main entrance, another coordinator quickly intercepted me. "All vendors and staff are to use the side entrance," she said briskly, not bothering to make eye contact. "I'm family," I said quietly. She glanced down at her tablet, scrolled for a moment, and frowned. Vance. "Oh yes, table 14. Actually, you are supposed to use the service entrance. Mrs. Davenport's notes are very specific. The service entrance led down a narrow, sterile hallway that smelled of industrial cleaning solution and freshly baked bread from the kitchen. Servers rushed past me carrying large trays, barely giving me a second glance. I finally emerged into the main reception area, where hundreds of guests were already mingling in glittering clusters, their laughter sounding as bright and sharp as breaking crystal. I recognized several faces in the crowd: board members from Vance Industries, investors I had personally courted, vendors I had negotiated with at 3 a.m. to save Ethan's disastrous deals. None of them saw me, or if they did, their eyes slid right past me without any sign of recognition. The name cards were displayed on an elegant table near the entrance. Tables 1 through 10 were printed on thick, ivory cardstock with shimmering gold calligraphy. Tables 11 through 13 had silver lettering on cream paper, and then there was table 14, handwritten on a plain white slip of paper. The ink was slightly smudged. Ellie V, it read. They hadn't even bothered to write out my full name. The table itself was tucked away in the far corner by the kitchen doors, partially obscured by a large potted plant. 3 members of the catering staff were already seated there, looking awkward and uncomfortable in their black uniforms. I sat down with the same practiced composure I had maintained through 1,000 similar humiliations. The chair was cold metal, not cushioned like the others. The tablecloth was plain white, not embroidered silk. Even the silverware was different, functional heavy steel instead of polished silver. "You don't have to sit here," one of the servers whispered, a young woman with kind, sympathetic eyes. "This is just where we take our breaks." "Apparently, I do," I replied, and something in the tone of my voice made her stop asking questions. The cocktail hour began, a low hum of conversation punctuated by the soft clinking of glasses. I sat at my table, a silent observer of the elaborate dance of social positioning. Then I saw him approaching, Richard Davenport himself, walking with the slow, measured stride of a man who has never had to hurry in his life. He was shorter than he appeared in his photos, but his presence seemed to fill the room in a way that had nothing to do with physical height. His suit probably cost more than my car. His watch definitely did. He stopped directly in front of me, his eyes conducting a cold assessment that felt like being scanned by a machine. "You must be the sister," he said. "Not Ellie, not Miss Vance, just the sister, as if I were a concept rather than a person." I stood up because sitting would have given him even more power, Ellie Vance. He didn't acknowledge my correction. "Ethan tells me you've been helpful with the transition." "Good. I appreciate people who know when it's time to step aside." His smile was thin and perfunctory, the kind of smile you'd give to an employee you were about to fire. "After today, Vance Industries enters a new era. Professional. Efficient. Family sentiment has no place in real business." "Family sentiment," I repeated, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. "Is that what you call it when someone saves a company from bankruptcy 3 separate times?" His eyes narrowed just slightly, the first genuine reaction I'd seen from him. "Ethan mentioned you assist with some administrative tasks. Ethan mentions a lot of things that aren't quite accurate." He studied me for another long moment, then seemed to dismiss whatever fleeting thought had crossed his mind. "After today, accuracy will be my team's responsibility. Enjoy the celebration, Miss." He paused, having already forgotten my name, and then walked away without finishing his sentence. 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I saw them approaching. My father and Ethan, moving through the crowd with the determined stride of men on a mission. Ethan was carrying a leather folder. My father wore the same grim expression he used when he was about to fire someone. "Ellie," Ethan said, slightly out of breath. "We need the signatures. Now, before the ceremony." "The Davenport contracts?" I asked, my voice a mask of innocence. "Just a formality," Ethan insisted, already opening the folder and pushing a pen into my hand. The pages were deliberately shuffled out of order with the signature lines highlighted in yellow, but the surrounding text conveniently obscured by other pages. "Sign here, and here, and here, and we can all get on with enjoying the celebration." I took the documents, pretending to scan them while I was actually confirming what I already knew. Page 23, hidden in the middle of the stack. "The undersigned hereby relinquishes all shareholding interest in Vance Industries, effective immediately upon completion of the merger," page 31. "All family positions will be subject to restructuring per Davenport Global operational requirements." Page 45. "All previous verbal or written agreements regarding employment or ownership are hereby rendered null and void." "This seems to eliminate my shareholding entirely," I said, looking up with an expression of practiced confusion. "Surely that must be a mistake." Ethan's face turned a blotchy red. "It's not a mistake. It's just restructuring. For efficiency, the Davenports have a more modern approach to corporate structure. Modern, as in, family members who built the company become expendable?" My father's patience finally snapped. "Don't make this difficult, Eleanor, not today. You've had a good run, but it's time to let the professionals handle things from here." "The professionals," I repeated softly. "Is that what we're calling the Davenports now?" "Just sign the papers," my father said, his voice dropping to the low, threatening tone he used to use when I was a child refusing to go to bed. I set the pen down gently on the table. "I need to use the restroom first. The contracts will still be here in 5 minutes." Ethan grabbed my wrist as I turned to leave Ellie. "We need this now." "The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then back up at his face, and something in my expression must have unsettled him because he let go. 5 minutes, I said, and walked away, leaving them standing there with their unsigned contracts and their rapidly growing panic. The bathroom mirror reflected a face I barely recognized. It was calm, composed, ready. I washed my hands slowly, watching the water run clear over my fingers while outside the ceremony was beginning. The string quartet had started to play, their music drifting faintly through the thick walls. I dried my hands on the plush, monogrammed towels that bore the intertwined D and V for Davenport and Vance, a union that was about to last exactly as long as this reception. When I returned to the main hall, the ceremony was over. Guests were finding their seats for dinner, the air filled with the rustle of expensive fabric and the gentle clinking of jewelry. The wedding party was seated at their elevated head table, Sophia glowing in her pearls and her satisfaction, Ethan beside her looking relieved that all the formalities were finally complete. He caught my eye from across the room and mouthed the word papers with a look of barely concealed panic. I walked right past him without a flicker of acknowledgement, returning to my corner table where the catering staff had now rotated shifts. The servers began bringing out the first course, some elaborate concoction involving truffle foam that looked more like a science experiment than food. My table received simple green salads. Apparently, even the menu had a strict hierarchy. I picked up my fork just as Sophia's voice suddenly pierced through the ambient chatter of the room she was standing. Her champagne glass held high, her voice pitched to carry. Before we continue, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here, everyone who truly matters to the future of Vance Industries. She paused, her eyes scanning the room until they found me in my corner. Of course, not everyone understands their place in that future. Some people seem to think they deserve more than they've actually earned. The room grew quiet, the guests sensing the drama bubbling just beneath the polished veneer of a wedding toast. Sophia's smile sharpened. But don't worry, we've made arrangements to accommodate everyone, even those who should just be grateful to be included at all. She looked directly at me. She doesn't deserve anything. Let her eat with the servants. The words landed with the precise, brutal impact she had intended: public, deliberate, final. Her bridesmaids let out a chorus of cruel, high-pitched laughter. Several Davenport Global executives joined in. And Ethan, my brother, the man whose career I had built from scratch, the man I had saved from bankruptcy 3 times, actually smirked. My mother turned her face away, suddenly fascinated by the floral centerpiece on her table. My father pulled out his phone again, scrolling through nothing, doing anything to avoid acknowledging what was happening. The investors and board members I had personally cultivated for years shifted uncomfortably in their seats but said nothing. At my table, the catering staff stared down at their plates, their faces burning with embarrassment for me and for themselves, for being associated with this moment of public cruelty. Something inside me didn't break. It crystallized. Years of being overlooked, undervalued, and erased, all condensed into this single, perfect moment of public humiliation. They thought they were finally putting me in my place. They had no idea they had just armed the weapon that was aimed directly at their hearts. I reached into my purse with movements so calm they felt choreographed. My phone felt cool and familiar in my hand. The encrypted app opened with a simple thumbprint. Aunt Clara had insisted on military-grade security. The message was already typed, waiting. 3 words that would trigger a financial avalanche. Terminate the agreement. I pressed send. The effect was immediate, but at first it was invisible. Somewhere, lawyers received automated notifications. Contracts began to dissolve. Financial transfers were initiated. The companies that Vance Industries depended on, logistics, technology, infrastructure, all suddenly belonged exclusively to Apex Strategies. The massive debt I now controlled through Phoenix Ventures was called in. Credit lines were instantly frozen. Access to all digital systems was revoked. The $28 million in promised investment evaporated, and with it, every single safety net Vance Industries had left. I set my phone face down on the table and picked up my water glass, taking a small, deliberate sip. Around me, the first course continued. Oblivious guests savored their truffle foam while an entire empire collapsed in real time. Richard Davenport's phone buzzed first. He glanced at it absently, then did a violent double take. His face went through a rapid series of changes, like storm clouds gathering. First confusion, then dawning understanding, then pure, unrestrained rage. More alerts followed, his phone lighting up like an emergency beacon. He stood up so abruptly that his chair crashed backward, the sound echoing through the hushed reception hall like a gunshot. "What is this?" His voice cut through every conversation, sharp enough to shatter crystal. He was scrolling frantically through his messages as his legal team's phones all began to buzz simultaneously. The contracts are void. The funding has been withdrawn. What kind of incompetence is this? Ethan fumbled for his own phone, his face draining of all color as he read the first message, then the second, then the flood of notifications that followed. Board members calling for emergency meetings, creditors demanding immediate payment, vendors confirming contract cancellations. Every single pillar holding up Vance Industries had been kicked out from under it at the exact same moment. Richard's voice rose to a roar. "This is finished. We don't invest in amateurs who can't even control their own board." He didn't even look at Ethan or Sophia. He just stormed toward the exit, his entire legal team scrambling behind him like a retreating army. "The wedding gifts will be returned," he called over his shoulder. "The marriage will be annulled. We do not associate with failure." The string quartet had stopped playing, their instruments hanging uselessly in their hands as they watched the chaos unfold. Guests began pushing back from their tables, phones appearing in every hand, whispered conversations erupting like brush fires. The entire Davenport clan was evacuating aunts, uncles, cousins, all following Richard's lead as if the building itself were on fire. Sophia stood frozen at the head table, her $40,000 dress suddenly looking like a cheap costume for a play that had been canceled. "Daddy!" she called out, her voice thin and desperate, but Richard was already gone. She whirled on Ethan, her face contorted with fury. "What did you do? What happened to the contracts?" Ethan's phone crashed to the floor, his hands shaking too violently to hold it. The screen cracked, spiderwebbing like the future he had just lost. My father had gone completely rigid, his own phone delivering a relentless barrage of catastrophic notifications. Vance Industries' stock price was in freefall. An emergency board meeting had been called. A vote of no confidence had been proposed. Bankruptcy attorneys were already reaching out proactively. My mother's high society friends were already gathering their purses, making hasty excuses about early mornings and forgotten appointments. The social contamination was spreading faster than spilled wine, as everyone scrambled to distance themselves from the Vance name as if it were a contagious disease. "What did you do?" Ethan's voice finally cracked, high and desperate, echoing across the now silent ballroom. Every single head turned to look, first at him, standing at the ruined head table in his perfect tuxedo, and then at me, standing by the servants' table in my understated dress. I stood up slowly, taking a moment to smooth my skirt, to place my napkin neatly beside my plate. The room held its breath as I walked toward them, the clicks of my heels on the marble floor the only sound in the sudden, deafening silence. "I gave you exactly what you thought I deserved," I said, my voice carrying perfectly in the hushed space. "Nothing." The word hung in the air between us, my final declaration echoing off the marble walls that had just witnessed the complete and utter dismantling of the Vance family empire. Ethan stood there, frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, his mind utterly unable to process how his invisible sister had just become the architect of his total destruction. Behind him, the head table looked like a painting of a shipwreck. Abandoned champagne flutes, Sophia's bouquet lying on its side, chairs pushed back in a chaotic rush. The exodus was now a stampede. I stood there, a silent observer between two worlds, the servants' table behind me, the wreckage of the main reception before me. As the remaining guests streamed toward the exits, Martin Webb, our biggest investor after the Davenports, was already on his phone, his voice sharp and clear. "Pull everything from Vance Industries. Yes, everything. Tonight." His wife gathered her shawl without a backward glance, their 20-year relationship with our family severed in less than 20 seconds. The wedding photographer lowered his camera, realizing there would be no more moments worth capturing. The videographer was already packing up his equipment, muttering to his assistant about partial payment. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments on their stands and were slipping out through the same service entrance I had been directed to use. Even the waitstaff had begun clearing tables that still held full plates of food, their professional training overriding the unfolding spectacle. Sophia's bridesmaids were clustered near the gift table, all frantically texting, their coordinated navy dresses now looking like the uniforms of a losing team. One of them, Victoria, I think, actually unpinned the small Vance Industries pin from her clutch and dropped it on the table as if it were contaminated. "This isn't happening," Sophia kept repeating, her voice climbing higher with each repetition. "Daddy will fix this. He always fixes everything." But Richard Davenport was gone, his convoy of black SUVs already speeding away from the estate. The $28 million promise had vanished with my 3-word text, and with it, any obligation he felt toward his daughter's unfortunate life choices. Ethan stumbled toward me, his gait unsteady as if he'd been physically struck. His white rose boutonniere was now hanging crooked, its edges already starting to brown. The confident, entitled heir who had stood at the altar just an hour ago had been replaced by someone I recognized from years of cleaning up his messes. Desperate, confused, and desperately looking for someone else to blame. "Ellie, please," he started, his voice cracking on my name. "We can work this out. It's family. You don't understand what you've done. Dad's legacy. Everything we built." A laugh escaped me, a sound so sharp and cold it made him take a step back. It wasn't a sound I had planned to make, but years of suppressed responses had to go somewhere. "Everything we built?" I let the pronoun hang in the air between us like a formal accusation. Name one deal you closed by yourself, one crisis you solved, one single time you saved this company. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. The Henderson acquisition. I had 37 meetings with Mr. Henderson at 5 a.m. while you were sleeping off hangovers next. The bridge funding from David Chin, my Wharton roommate's husband. He trusted my word, not yours. Try again. The supplier contract negotiations, which I negotiated at 3 a.m. while you were at a casino night, using relationships that I personally built over years of fixing your mistakes. Each word landed like a physical blow. Ethan's face crumpled. The carefully constructed facade he'd worn his entire life finally shattering into a million pieces. "I'm your brother," he whispered, as if that relationship still meant anything after decades of erasure. "I saved Vance Industries 17 times while you took the credit," I continued, my voice as steady as a metronome. "I built the very connections you're desperately trying to call right now. The only thing you ever built, Ethan, was a reputation on my back, and now you can wear its collapse." My mother materialized beside him, a ghost in designer clothing. Her makeup, so carefully applied that morning, had given way to dark streaks of mascara that no amount of expensive waterproofing could withstand. Her hands were shaking as she reached toward me, stopping just short of making contact as if I might actually burn her. "How could you destroy your own family?" The question came out as a horrified whisper, but it carried the weight of genuine, total incomprehension. For the first time in years, I really looked at my mother. The perfect composure she had worn like armor for my entire life had cracked, revealing something I had never seen before. Fear. Not anger, not disappointment, but pure, unadulterated terror at the thought of losing the only identity she'd ever had, Robert Vance's wife, Ethan Vance's mother. "You destroyed me first," I said, each word deliberate and clean. "Every birthday you forgot because you were busy planning one of Ethan's parties. Every achievement of mine you ignored because it didn't have his name attached to it. Every time you let me eat alone while you celebrated his mediocrity, you killed your daughter years ago, Catherine. I'm just returning the favor with interest. The dawning recognition that flooded her eyes was worth more than any apology could ever have been. She knew. She had always known. Every slight had been a deliberate choice. Every act of erasure had been a strategic decision. She'd sacrificed one child to elevate the other, and now the bill had finally come due. My father appeared beside them, his phone clutched uselessly in his hand. He looked like he had aged a decade in 10 minutes. The powerful patriarch was reduced to a tired old man watching his empire burn. The board's called an emergency meeting, he said, to no one in particular. They're voting me out, 30 years, and they're voting me out. Sophia, abandoned by her father and her future, approached our broken family huddle with the unsteady gait of someone in deep shock. Her cathedral-length veil dragged behind her, picking up dirt and debris from the floor of the collapsed celebration. Her voice, when she finally found it, was shrill with a rage that bordered on hysteria. "You're nobody," she screamed, mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. "You're nothing. You can't do this to us." I stood up from the servants' table for the last time, rising with the slow, deliberate dignity of someone who has nothing left to prove. I walked past her, past my family, past the smoldering wreckage of their ambitions. Then I stopped, turned back, and delivered my final words so quietly that Sophia had to lean in to hear them. "I'm the woman who just turned your $28 million investment into worthless paper. I'm the one who owns every single company your father needs to salvage his reputation. I'm the sister-in-law you should have treated with respect. And now, you're the one who deserves nothing. Enjoy eating the scraps of what's left." I left Sophia standing there in her ruined wedding dress and walked out through the same service entrance I had been directed to use just a few hours earlier. The hallway that had felt like a tunnel of humiliation now felt like a portal, a gateway between the person I had been and the person I was becoming. My heels echoed differently against the concrete floor, no longer the sound of someone being dismissed, but of someone dismissing an entire life of servitude. The valet who had mistaken me for a catering worker stood looking utterly bewildered as the last of the guests streamed past him, their expensive cars creating a traffic jam of escape. He saw me approaching and started to apologize again, but I just handed him a $100 bill. "You were just following instructions," I said. "That's what employees do. I used to be very good at it. My car was exactly where I'd parked it, a modest and practical vehicle wedged between the luxury cars that were now peeling out of the estate. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, watching the chaos unfold in my rearview mirror. The estate's lights were still blazing, but frantic shadows were moving behind the windows. The fairy lights they had strung through the garden swayed in the evening breeze, illuminating nothing but abandonment. My phone was buzzing continuously. Messages from Aunt Clara, from my lawyer, from the CEOs of the companies I now fully controlled, all confirming the completion of the transfers and acquisitions. But I turned it off. There would be time for business tomorrow. Tonight was for something else. Freedom, perhaps. Or maybe just silence. A silence that wasn't filled with the sound of someone else's demands. The next morning, the headlines spread faster than wildfire. Someone at the wedding had recorded a video on their phone. Sophia's cruel declaration, the mass exodus of guests, Ethan's desperate stumbling confusion. It was uploaded before midnight and had over 3 million views by dawn. The hashtag Wedding Day Massacre was trending. Financial reporters who had never even heard of Vance Industries were suddenly experts on our family's dysfunction. The business section ran a series of photos that told the entire story without a single word. Ethan's face frozen in panic, my father clutching his phone like a lifeline, my mother's mascara-streaked shock. But the photo that truly went viral was one I hadn't even known was taken. It was a picture of me, walking away from the servants' table with perfect posture, my face a mask of calm, while behind me, the entire wedding collapsed into chaos. Someone had captioned it, "The Walk That Destroyed an Empire." By the second day, Vance Industries' stock had fallen by 68%. Trading had to be halted twice. The board held an emergency meeting that Ethan wasn't even invited to. They voted him out in absentia. Not that it mattered, there was nothing left to run. Creditors were lining up with collection notices. The building they had operated from for 20 years was foreclosed on. Before the end of the week, Aunt Clara emerged from the shadows like an avenging angel, armed with a filing cabinet's worth of evidence. She didn't just leak documents, she curated them into a damning narrative, every innovation I had created that had Ethan's name stamped on it, every crisis I had solved while he was claiming victory, emails where he admitted he didn't understand basic financial concepts, voice recordings of him begging me to just handle it before important meetings. Within 72 hours, the story had completely shifted. Business journals that had once celebrated Ethan Vance's vision were now dissecting the story of the invisible sister who ran everything. Former employees came forward with their own stories. David Park gave an interview about how I had personally secured the bridge funding that saved Vance Industries, while Ethan was passed out in his office. The Henderson deal was re-examined, with old Mr. Henderson himself confirming that he had only agreed to sell because of his deep respect for me, not for Ethan. 3 months passed in a blur of construction and contracts. The Apex Tower began to rise in the heart of the business district, paid for with the profits from companies that were now thriving under competent management. I hired the best people from Vance Industries first, giving them the equity and respect my brother had always dangled but never delivered. David Park became our chief technology officer, finally treated like the genius he was, instead of a glorified tech support guy. Even Mrs. Park, the seamstress from the bridal shop, now ran our in-house alterations department for the corporate wardrobes we provided to all our employees. We instituted Sunday dinners, but these were different. They were held at a large, round table in our top-floor conference room, with panoramic windows overlooking the city. Everyone's voice carried equal weight. There was no service entrance, no separate menu for staff, no invisible people doing all the visible work. Sarah, my former assistant who had watched my family diminish me for years, raised a glass one evening. To the woman who turned a servant's table into a CEO's desk, she said, the toast was repeated, but what mattered more was the laughter that followed, genuine, warm, and inclusive. Aunt Clara and I had lunch every month, no longer in truck stop diners, but in my office. We shared stories of what we were building from the ashes of the world that had banished us. Robert still calls me. She mentioned one afternoon, leaves these long, rambling voicemails asking if I can talk to you, convince you to help them. And I delete them without listening to the end. 20 years of exile taught me that some bridges are meant to stay burned. The call from Ethan came exactly 1 year after the wedding, almost to the hour. The number was unfamiliar, probably a borrowed phone. His voice was different, hollowed out, maybe honest for the very first time. I need to know something, he said, with no preamble, no false pleasantries. If I had just treated you fairly, would you have saved us anyway? I could have left him wondering. I could have twisted the knife one final time, but revenge had already been served, and cruelty without purpose was just another form of weakness. Yes, I said simply, I would have saved you every single time, Ethan. That's the difference between us. You saw family as something to be used. I saw it as something to be protected, until you all showed me that I wasn't family at all. The silence on the line stretched on, filled with 20 years of what could have been. I'm sorry, Ellie, he whispered, and for once in his life it sounded real. I hung up the phone without another word, not out of anger or spite, but because some stories need endings, not epilogues. Outside my window, the city sparkled with light and possibility. My phone showed 17 new messages from actual partners, real allies, people who saw me not as a function, but as a force. The servants' table had been left far behind, but more than that, I had built a new table entirely. One where no one would ever eat alone, serve in the shadows, or disappear into someone else's success. The Vance Empire had collapsed in 3 words. The Apex Empire was being built one dignified decision at a time. If this story of calculated revenge left you breathless, hit that like button right now. My favorite moment was when Ellie typed those 3 words, terminate the agreement, and $28 million vanished instantly. What was your most satisfying moment? Share it in the comments below. Don't miss more stories of triumph over betrayal. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. The end of the story.